Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. We're glad you decided to check us out. God has a specific message of hope for your life and mine today. So listen up.
Storms come. They threaten us, scare us, and they damage us. Sometimes the storms come in different forms, but they carry the same characteristics. How do you deal with the waves of trouble that keep coming? How do you become unshakable?
You know, it's funny, when that song, that hymn, I don't know if you know it or not, that was actually the guy that wrote the hymn part of that, It Is Well With My Soul, actually wrote that in the middle of a personal storm in his life. He was a missionary that had left way back in the day when you had to sail across ships and there were no sail across the ocean in ships and there were no cell phones and stuff like that. And he was sailing across the sea to go on the mission field. And the news that he received when he got to the other side later was that his wife and children had all died, who were supposed to be coming later. And so when he sailed back, you know, putting the dates together and stuff as he was sailing back across the sea, about the point that really they were dying, you know, the Lord impressed that song upon him, you know, as well with my soul, regardless of what's going on around. And, you know, over the course of the series, we've looked at several points about how to be unshakable, because that's what this has been about. Because, you know, storms are coming. I mean, that's a given. You know, you don't accept Christ and then all of a sudden magically you have no more storms in your life. That's just crazy. That doesn't happen. Jesus told us differently. You know, in John 16, you know, that we're going to have trouble in this life. That's coming. It's a given. So it's not about where you're going to have it or not. It's about what you're going to do with it when it comes. You know, and so many, we see people around us all the time. They're shook by things, with stuff that's going on in their lives. It's hard, you know, to live this life. I mean, life comes, man. Life happens. It really, really does. But we've looked at some things about how to be unshakable in the midst of those situations. In the first week, we looked at kind of having the right preparation. You know, that, you know, to have a foundation that is unshakable, you know, to be unshakable, you have to have a foundation that's unmistakable. You know, and that your foundation is on Christ. That's really what it is. That the decisions that you make and the reasons you do the things that you do, you know, and your hope about the future and the outcomes of the things in your life are not based on your own best interest. They're based on what will honor the Lord the most. That you put that on Christ and you say, those are the things that I'm going to follow, and that's what it is. That your foundation is on Christ. Not that you're making a couple of decisions to do things God's way, and then other things over here you're kind of like, I don't know. You know, I kind of rather do it my way, but that you are founded in Christ. You know, your foundation is there. And any other foundation, if you kind of build a foundation of where you really about a career, but you know, really, I really like this stuff about Jesus, so I'll build him a little house off to the side over here. And, you know, kind of have him over here. If you don't put your foundation on that, it's going to be on sand. And at some time, it'll crumble. You know, it will. You know, we see that in church. You know, there's people that have foundation. They come to church. They try a couple things that God said do. And they think, hey, that's cool. That worked pretty decently. I think I must be a Christian now because my life got better because I tried a couple of things the Lord said. And they never really changed the foundation of their life. And ultimately, you see them leave, you know, the church. And you see them later because the problems that they came to solve kind of got solved. You know, so they left and they don't need Jesus anymore. And then eventually it falls again. You know, you see this over and over and over. But your foundation must be unmistakable to be unshakable. Secondly, we looked at the right perspective that you got to have on the storm. You know, when you follow Jesus, you follow the one who controls the storms. And following Jesus doesn't make you storm less. It makes you storm proof. You know, and that's what you've got to look at it, because a lot of times I've seen people so many times, they start to follow Christ. And then soon after, not too long after, there's a euphoria, I'm following Jesus, and I'm seeing things happen. And invariably, at some point, something goes wrong, and then everybody goes, oh, but wait, I'm following Jesus. Why are things going bad for me when I'm following Jesus? You know, that's Jesus never said he would take the trouble away. There's things you avoid, obviously, because you do things Jesus' way. You avoid some things, but there's some stuff that's unavoidable. And we've talked about a lot of those storms. You know, maybe if you're out there on Facebook Live and you're listening and you've been going through it, man, maybe you're going through it right now. You know, and you're like, I'm trying to follow Jesus. What's wrong? You know, it's not that necessarily that something is wrong. You know, then last week we looked at the right priority of action in any storm. You know, it says, you remember our statement says, if it's you, I will do. We talked about Peter, who was in the boat, and he saw Jesus. And he said, okay, it's a storm, and the waves are going crazy, but Jesus is walking on the water. If it's you, Jesus, I'll come to you. If it's you, Jesus, I'll forsake all conventional wisdom, and I'll do whatever you say to do. And wherever you're heading, I'm going to go there too, even if it looks stupid on the outset. I'll go do that, and that's what's up. And we look at those type of situations. It's not my circumstance. It's not conventional wisdom, not my personal desires, but Jesus, if it's you, I will do. But this week, we're going to look at a different type of storm. A lot of the storms that I've referenced over these past few weeks, and probably the majority of the times we think about a storm, have been storms that come upon us. It's the unexpected financial problem. It's the health issue. It's when you come home with the diagnosis of the C word, and you weren't ready for that. You think it's something like that. When an adult child makes a choice that is just crazy, and you're like, why in the world you're going to drag me into, and it's going to be in a mess forever. You're going to drag me into. Why is that? It's things like that, things that we don't really physically choose. The storms that just come up in life. But what I want to talk today about is really is the storms that we choose. Because the truth is that sometimes it is because of a choice that we made. We're just a little bit too curious. We're a little bit too rebellious. We're a little bit too headstrong. We gave into our desires too much. And we we make a choice of a storm over the peace that God had. And we choose that in our life. And we have no idea. We think we know everything that's going to go on. But that comes to us, and then we're wrecked. And we're left to deal with things that we never realized would be a consequence of that. And we're left to deal with them possibly for years or decades. And we think, there's a myth that we think that because I chose it, then I deserve this, and God's just going to beat on me for a while because I was an idiot. And God's just kind of done with me because I've made this bad choice or this bad storm, or I made this choice, so I'm just going to have to grit my teeth, and God's presence will return at some point, maybe if I do good enough to make up for the storm that I caused. And that's a myth. I think there's some things that we need to understand about the storms that we choose. And I want to use a story today from the book of Acts, chapter 27, about Paul. I think the truth is I'm going to tell you everything that we've talked about the storms up to this point. All the lessons that I mentioned earlier, everything you might have taken notes on, or listened to about storms that we don't choose, they all apply to the storms that we do choose. Every one of them do. We haven't wasted anything. But we all know that everything isn't something everything isn't something we could have avoided if we could have known better. Sometimes we do know better, and we just choose the storms for our lives in spite of all that. Well, what then do we do? I'm talking about the nicks and the trips and the fumbles that embarrass us, all the way up to the cuts and the breaks and the scars that seem to threaten us. What about those storms? I know a lot of us have seen friends in situations, and we've been the ones to cry out to God, cry out to tell them, you've probably gone and told them they made a stupid mistake, and it's like, oh, it's blown up in their face. And you've been the one, you've gone and counseled and said, look, God's not through with you yet. It's really okay. And it's fine when somebody else is in that situation, but I don't know about you, but when I get in that situation and I choose something stupid, and make a bad choice for God and create a storm within my life and within the life of my family or people around me or stuff, it's hard for me to tell myself that. I do. I'm going to lie to you. I think, well, you got to be done with me after that one. That's colossal. I think you just need to send me out to pasture or find me just stuck like a log cabin in the woods, and I'll just go live as a hermit where I won't mess with anybody else again. You feel that way, and I do. I feel that way, and people I talk to all the time, they feel that way. God's through with me. I blew it. But that's just not the case. And so we're going to look at Acts 27. This is a story of a choice. It's a storm and a shipwreck. And we're going to see some things that God has to say to us about the storms that we choose. Now, here's the story. Start in Acts chapter 27, verse 1. It says, When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, see, the Apostle Paul has come along and he's been captured, and arrested. Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. Now, this is the guy, okay, just so you know, if you're following Jesus, it doesn't mean that storms won't come. Paul is the guy who wrote most of the New Testament. Paul was, he was a big dude in theology. He was trying to do the right thing at this point, Things were, if you want to talk about somebody whose physical condition got worse when he started to follow Jesus, Paul is one of them, because before he was following Jesus, he was a leading Pharisee. He was a rising star in the intellectual community. He was praised. Everybody knew him. It was awesome. Paul was great. He met his name was Saul at that point. He met Jesus on the road to Damascus one time in a supernatural encounter, and he changed his life. And Jesus used the guy that was killing Christians, because he was, to turn around and write most of the New Testament, to set the tone for people for years and years and years to come. And after that, then he's on the run and people are beating him, but he didn't care. He's going getting thrown out of cities. He's been beaten and thrown out of a city and left for dead. And when he finally came to, they all thought he was dead. He came to, he crawls up and goes back, tries to go back into the city to tell them again. I mean, this is the type of guy you have here. If you want to talk about somebody who got in a storm when he started to follow Jesus, this is the dude, all right? So Paul is captured and he's handed over to Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. In verse 2, he said, we boarded a ship from Adrantium. I practice saying that. That's sad. Anybody else get hung up with biblical words? Okay. I worked hard on that, and I still can't say it. Okay. About to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. And Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, go ahead, was with us, and so Paul and some of the other people were put in the care of a centurion. They're put on a boat to Rome. See, a couple of years earlier, Paul had been taken prisoner and was held for trial with the Jews. And what he had done, because he was a Roman citizen, he appealed to Caesar, which is the right of a Roman citizen, and so he wanted his case to go to the Supreme Court, basically, is what was going down. And so, he had the right to do that, and so he did. And so, it's a series. And then Paul was finally on his way to Rome. This was kind of where this was headed. He sailed away. It's kind of like he had a connecting flight in Lycia, because they had to jump ship, change ships over there. And of course, the wind was against them, and they lost a lot of time. The sailing was getting dangerous because of the season, because they were losing time. It was taking longer. It was getting past the Day of Atonement, if you see in your Bible there. And what that means is after that, the season was getting rough. It was bad to sail then, And Paul had tried to warn them from sailing. He said, look, you need to hang out and wait. And against his advice, it said in verse 11, it says, but the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. And since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. So here they set out. It was not what Paul wanted to do. He kind of had his own plan, but they made a bad choice. And here's what ended up happening. As they began to sail in verse 14, it says, before very long, a wind of hurricane force. Okay, we all understand that. We've been seeing that on the news. Hurricane force called the nor'easter, swept down from the island. So a hurricane force wind gets after them, and it overwhelms them, and it drives them along. And day after, they can't fight it. They can't sail into it. There's no motor. They can't paddle out of it. So what you do in that situation, you're just left to be driven along by this wind wherever it's going to take you. And day after day, it's horrible, and they're pitching things over the side. They're trying to lighten the weight of the boat so the boat will stay on top of the water and they won't get filled up, all kinds of stuff. And it gets to verse 21. It says, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. I don't know about you. I'm just saying. But if I've made a dumb decision and it's cost everybody and nobody has eaten for a really long time and we're all freaked out, you don't want to be that guy to me. You just say that. Everybody knows that guy, don't you? The one that, Mr. Obvious. If you'd listen to me. All right, I tell you what, I think we need to lighten the boat. Paul, come here. I'll take care of that. But that's a miracle of God that didn't throw him overboard. I mean, come on, man. But, you don't want to be that guy. But he was that guy. But he's Paul, and he wrote most of the Bible, so he's got to be right, I guess, or whatever. So he's a I told you so guy. And he continues on, though. It gets better. He said, but now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. That makes up for saying I told you so. It says, only the ship will be destroyed. Whoa, wait a minute. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. Verse 25 says, so keep up your courage, men. For I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Yeah, I love that. It's going to be great. We're going to make it. But we're going to roll into an island and crash. That's what's going to happen. You think that's not really going to win the halftime speech yesterday. That's just not going to make it work in the ball game. It's not going to really work out. But he did. Said, and they think, whoo, it's over. Probably what happened is a lot of those guys just heard, hey, you're going to be fine. God's going to save you. And they totally missed the last part. We're going to lose the boat, and we're going to have to run into the ground, but you're going to be fine. It's all right. It's going to be a big crash, and everything's going to explode, but you're going to be okay. That's a big deal. And so here they go. Now, after he said this, he's giving them the good news, right? It goes like he said. It gets worse. And they're getting driven along by the sea and all that, and they realize that they're getting driven towards land. And then they get worried because, oh no, what if we can't stop? It's like if you're in your car and you're speeding toward a wall and you realize the brakes are out. That's kind of what's going on for them. Why if I can't stop? And they're going to get crashed in the rocks and stuff, and they're worried about that. And it gets dark, and they're worried about getting slammed in the rocks and it's going to destroy the ship. What's going to happen to me? What can I cling on to? All of this type of stuff. And it was midnight also, so that makes it worse. Dark always makes it worse. All the horror movies are at night. Nobody has them in the middle of the day, like whenever I can see what's coming. It's always at night, right? So night is scary anyway. And so some of them tried to get away, and they tried to let the lifeboats down to leave. And then Paul, being the bold soul that he was, he reminded them that God had said, unless these men, unless we all stay with the ship, you can't be saved. And you got to love what the soldiers did. They listened this time. So they didn't just say, no, you can't get in the lifeboats. They cut them loose and let them go. In for a penny, in for a pound. They obeyed and they cut them loose. And in the darkness, with the wind driving them, with the lifeboats gone, at the darkest time of night, right before dawn, because that's what it is, Paul spoke up again. He said, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. So for the last 14 days, listen to this. For the last 14 days, you have been in constant suspense. For 14 days. 14 days. Constant suspense, and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. He has to let them know, you ain't eaten nothing. You've been so scared and stressed out, you haven't eaten anything for 2 weeks. 14 days. Has anybody in here been so upset that you have forgotten to eat for 14 days? I want to shake your hand and tell you thank you for being alive. That's what I want to tell you. My goodness, I have never, of all the things, and I've gone through some junk in my life, I have never been to the point that I have completely forgotten about food for an entirety of 2 weeks and not thought about it. But they were in this type of situation. He says, you haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food that you need it to survive. You need to live. In other words, Paul is saying, look, I believe God said we're going to make it, but you guys got to eat. You got to believe it too. Eat some food. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. Might turn gray, but you're not going to lose it. It might turn gray, but it won't turn loose. There you go. So anyway, so they eat, and and here's what they do. This is how bad it is. They eat as much as they can, and then they throw the rest of it overboard. You got to think, because I got a lot in the boat. That's in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's say I'm trusting the Lord. Okay, we're eating, and we're going to throw the rest of it overboard so that we can live. And so they're all in. And when the dawn comes, they see the land, and they run the ship aground, and it's destroyed. But they all 276 of them, they make it to shore unscathed, and they begin to make their way to Rome. Now, here's a few things that you need to understand about the storms that you choose. Because storms are a great metaphor. We've used them all through this series. You can see it, I can see it. You know, you can throw darts at a storm and find something that would relate to our life, the metaphor of the storm. But here's the first thing that I'm going to tell you about storms that we choose. The storms we choose don't trump the plans that God made. Do you understand that? Now, here's the myth that we subscribe to. We think that my sin is so great that God, in his wisdom, could not count on that, and in his power could not handle that. So God throws his hands up in the air every time I choose to make a bad choice, and it may be a whopper, buddy, that may change the course of my life, and we forget the size of God. You know, Isaiah 46:10, God said this, "Look, I make known the end from the beginning, from the ancient times, what is still to come. And I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do that I please." So one thing you need to understand is in your humbleness and your sadness or your humility for making a mistake that you knew was horrible, do not become arrogant to think that you now possess a power greater than the Lord and you have changed the course of history. I love watching movies about stuff like the butterfly effect and stuff like that and time travel and all that smack. But the truth is everything that we will ever do or ever have done, it does not alter, it does not derail the plans of God. God set out, you know, it doesn't, you may feel like you've destroyed your life, but you've destroyed the life course that God set out for you, and you have no other recourse. But the truth is that while you may have altered the order, you didn't alter the plan that God set in motion from the beginning. The truth is that every decision to choose the storm will cost you. And some of you, it will cost dearly. They lost time, they lost supplies, they took on a lot of stress and fear. But here's the truth. Paul still went to Rome. A few years earlier, God had told Paul, "You're going to go do this." He told him again in the middle, and after he told him that, he went to jail, and people forgot about him and all this smack. And a couple years later, now he's finally on the road, and they're going to get crashed by a hurricane, and nobody will listen to him. But even so, he still went to Rome. And whatever Rome God has for you, whatever destination that he has chosen for you, you're still here. You're still there. You won't get there the same person that you were or the way you thought it would work, but the destination is still the same. And you have to remember that. I mean, so many times we feel like in the frustration of the moment that it's a life or death decision for us. And it may change some things. But ultimately, if I am following the Lord, regardless of the decision I've made, my end is set. And I love what George Washington used to say, right? Was George Washington riding in the battle? He would ride on a horse, and they were like, "Hey, you're like the general. You'll be president one day." No, I didn't say that. Anyway, they're like, "You're the general. You should get down, dude, because they're going to try to shoot you." That would be, could you imagine if you're on the other side? "I shot George Washington." Whatever that was, that would be a big deal. I took out a general. You know what he would say? Follow the Lord, he said, "The time of my homegoing has never changed." Regardless of where he is, he recognized that God was in control. And you need to recognize that too. The wind and the waves, they do know his name. And here's the thing about the storms we choose. After the "I told you" speech by Paul, everybody's freaking out. It's the darkest of night. They knew the dangerous rocks were near. They didn't know where. They didn't know. They started to lower the lifeboats. But when Paul reminded them what God said, and everyone has to stay in the boat, they cut the lifeboat. That's huge. I don't know if I would have had what it took to do that. They cut the lifeboats and they let them go. And here's something that they understood. They disobeyed before. They made the bad choice before. But when it became time to make another choice, what did they do? They were obedient. Here's the second I'm going to tell you about a storm. It doesn't matter what in the middle of the storm you're at. It doesn't matter what part you're in. It doesn't matter if you're like 3/4 of the way through it and you just realize you're in it and you don't know what you're going to do about it. Here's the truth. The wisest decision that you can make is the one that honors God the most. All the time. I don't care if you are in, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a scenario that's just the worst thing in the world. You're in prison and you've done it all and it's there and you feel like it's over. That moment, here's the beautiful thing about following Christ. At that moment, you have just as much opportunity to be successful in your life as you did before you made that decision. Because at every moment, you can choose to honor God with the next moment in your life, and that is success. It's always there. We think it gets covered up with all our junk, but that's not true. That's not true, online campus. You're out there watching that. It's not true. You have stopped. You've come up to the end, and you think it's over. It's not. It's absolutely not. You know, the thing that we need to understand as well is for some. I mean, the thing about it is they had these lifeboats, and I think that's something that gets passed over in this story somewhat. I think all of us have lifeboats in our storm. I think we all do. You know, we have the things that we choose that we think we're going to make it better. We're going to fix it. I'm going to make it better. I'm going to choose my way to get out of it. Or maybe it's a way that you feel comfort in the middle of a storm. You know, I don't know how that is. It's a way you try to get out or away from where the lifeboats are our attempts to save ourselves from the storms. It's our way out. And they come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. I'll be honest with you. In your life, divorce may be your storm. You choose that or you chose it. Now you know it's not a good job. It's not a good deal. But you know what? God's not through with you. He's John 10:10 still in effect. You know, he has a better life than you could possibly ever dream, imagine, plan for you. It's all right. It's not over. For some of us, divorce is a lifeboat. And the marriage is the storm. And right now, you're getting driven by a wind that you don't know. And you think, and you're looking at that lifeboat going, if I just lowered it and paid $99 to Tim Parkman or whoever it is, I could get out of this. And God's saying, you need to cut that loose. For some of us, it's other things. It's other dangerous things. For some of us, maybe when you get in a storm, you want to go buy something. And you've been in a storm a long time, and your spouse is looking at you and going, man, how many shirts can you buy? How many handbags can you buy? How many pieces of fishing gear can you buy, women? How many can you do that? And guys, you need to stop with the handbags. They're just too expensive. You only need one, guys. But I'm saying, you know, we look at those things. It may be something more. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe you think, man, if I just get drunk and completely forget my problems for a moment, it's not going to hurt anybody. And you keep trying to crawl into that lifeboat and lower it down. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. There's loads of things, but what God is saying is if you don't stay on this boat, you're probably not going to make it. If you keep trying to crawl into those lifeboats, eventually you're going to fall off into the sea, and you're not going to make it through here. You need to stay in the boat. You need to cut the lifeboats that tell you you can get away from what God has for you if it gets too tough. You need to. That's what that is putting your foundation on Jesus. And if Jesus falls, you're going to fall. But that's fine with you. And that's where it has to get to. And your decisions have to be toward that. You need to cut the lifeboats loose because there's no life there. There's not. It's just a smaller boat in a bigger storm. And that's all it is. And you want to stick with the Lord. Now, you know, I love Jerry Fine, who is, you've heard me talk about him a lot. He's been a lot of impact on my life. He's going to be coming in the first part of next year with his wife, Marilyn. We're going to talk about making disciples. He retired in the 80s and has been doing nothing but trying to make disciples, spending his full time making disciples. And we're going to talk about that, have a conference in first part of next year. But he wrote a book called Making Decisions based on God's personal promises. And I love what he said. He said, in there, he said, the Christian life is always from this point forward. It's beautiful. It's right. You can't change your past. You can ask God to forgive it. And you can move on from it. You may have to deal with it somewhat, but you can't change it. But all of that is covered by grace. And it's everything God is able to redeem. See, here's what people do when the shipwreck happens. There's really about two things I see happen most all that are failures when I see the shipwreck happen. Here's how it goes. So what they spend their life trying to pull the boat back out in the sea. They get out in the sea and they're waist deep in water and they've got a rope on it, and I'm going to pull this back out and pretend it never happened. You know, you can't change what happened before. You can't go back and fix your past. And you know what? God never asked you to. You know that? When you screwed it up, there's no verse that said, and God said, return in time and make a better decision. That doesn't happen. I don't care what happened to Barry Allen in The Flash. It doesn't work. Some of you caught that, some of you don't. Yes, I'm a geek. It's okay. We'll move on. But see, Jesus is the one that redeems our past. He's the one who died for every sin, both past and future, that would ever happen. You know, Jesus' sacrifice really was enough. And continually trying to recapture and to recapture the past robs you of focusing on the fullness of your future that God has planned for you. You cannot do it, so stop it. I know every time you go back to that moment, every time you run into a consequence that comes from that moment back there, you may be reminded of it, but you don't have to be trapped and stay there. Deal with it, move forward, because God has something better for you. That's the truth. And if you follow Him and you trust Him and you make the wise decision, it may be a little rough around, but I guarantee you when you ride it out, you'll still get to Rome. It's going to happen. For you, John 10:10 is still in effect. When I talk about that, I love the way the Message says He has a life for us is more and better life than we possibly ever dream or imagine. Totally grammatically incorrect, but totally awesome at the same time. Is no matter what point you start to follow Jesus, He's got a better life for you out in front of you than what you had behind you or what you would have had without Him. That is the truth. And it's always in effect every moment. No matter how good your life gets, no matter how bad your life gets, God has something better in your future. And that's a promise. And we should act like that. We should realize that. That should help you through the hard times. That should inspire you to follow God in the good times. Rather than what we do sometimes, life gets better, we let God go because it's going fine now. Woo! It's all right. I don't really need Jesus. I'll just He hit it one time, the plate will spin for a while. It's all right. No, that's when you need to hold into Christ to see what is coming that is better. And a lot of times that's when we miss the next blessing, is when we're too much of enjoying the one we have now. You know, here's the other thing that happens when people, shipwreck happens. This is what happens. They look around at the carnage that they've caused and they live the rest of their life in the wreckage. They resign themselves to live in the wreckage of that life. They're racked by guilt. They're destroyed by their failure. And when God has never sentenced them to that prison. You realize that? When you're stuck in something that you did from behind, you know how you get out of that? God, I'm sorry, you were right. Absolutely. Not doing that again. Let's move forward. And from that moment on, every consequence that God brings into your situation is not just to beat you up about it, but that's a chance that He's going to take to show you that He's faithful and that His promises are still true. And too many times, every consequence that we come to, we turn around and look at that and go, yeah, I'm chained to that one. Just go stand back here. Just beat me a little bit more about that. That's all right. It's going to fix it. No, it won't. That's not what God intended at all. He has a plan. He can forgive you. He has a plan to move forward and redeem that failure and turn it into something. Listen to this. He will take what you failed and He will turn that into something that will be a jewel in the crown one day that you present to Him when you get to heaven. You realize that? He will redeem your failures, and He will take the results of those past, and He will turn them into something that's wonderful. It may be just this. Wow, you were a freaking junkie wacko, and you just used to beat people up and steal stuff all the time. But you start following Jesus, and I don't know what happened to that, because you're not that anymore. Now, we don't like to say that because we don't want to accept the bad parts of our story, the choices that we made, but some of the choices are the contrast that comes in our life when what God does for us. And then sometimes it takes people around us a long time to see what God has already known, because He looks ahead and sees what He's going to make you in the future. And that's why He can still love you and be proud of you, because He has a plan for you. You just got to believe that. You know, not only that, but here's the last truth here. I said part of this earlier, but I want to accentuate something. Every storm you choose will cost you, but it won't bankrupt you. You know, the ship was lost, and it was wrecked, and it was run aground, and it was over, but they weren't done. All 276 of them made it to shore and continued on their journey. Paul was still going to Rome to do what God had told him before. 2 Timothy 1:12 says, "This is why I am suffering as I am. Yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed and am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day." I want you to center on that phrase. Guard what I have entrusted to him until that day, until the day that I meet him. I have put my life in Christ. I've set it there. I believe that he can guard it. And I want to tell you something. I believe that God can even guard it from me and my stuff and my mess-ups and my slip-ups. If I put it in front of God, I believe that he, as jacked up as I am, that he still is powerful enough to guard what I have put in his hands. The truth is, if you were able to conceive the thought that you worry about what God thinks, the truth is that that's probably proof that he's not finished with you yet. And if you can't conceive it, it just means that you got a little bit longer than the rest of us for him to understand, for him to get through to you on that. He's not finished with you, and the truth is you're just using that as an excuse to avoid the next course of action that you know he wants you to take. Stop doing it. Stop being the person that, stop trying to game the system. I love the way a preacher I heard once said this about Paul. I think it describes him really well. It says, Paul didn't have a plan for the future. He had a plan to obey the Spirit today. That's a good plan. That served Paul well. That made him close enough that God chose to use him to write most of your New Testament. What if you just live today? Not that you're worried about the future, but I'm going to plan that right now, I'm just going to obey the Lord. I'm going to obey what the Spirit tells me to do today. What your life is really about right there. And right there. And it changed. It's about this right here. Now it's about this. It just continually changes. And in each one of those moments, you have the ability to have complete and total success with God when you choose to obey him in the moment that you're in. There's a myth that God just waits around for you to screw up. And then he just makes it hard on you, and he damages you to punish you and rain retribution down on you, on your life for doing something stupid. I don't think that's God at all. Romans 8 tells us that there's no more condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. What that means is there's no more punishment to be done. Jesus' sacrifice was good enough to cover it all. And when you think God needs to just whip you because you're mean and he's just mad at you, he's just going to beat you up for no reason, God's not that short-sighted. I might be. God's not. God has a greater plan, and what God has promised is that he will use all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Another gem from Romans. And what that means is if you continue to follow the Lord, even the things that happen that are horrible, God will turn them to something positive in your life and in the lives of people around you. Here's the thing. Realize this. The storms you choose can become the storms God will use. They're not wasted moments of your life. They are not gone forever into a sea of disgustingness that will ever happen. God has a way of redeeming things. Now, those of you who follow Christ, I'll speak to you a minute. So you have this promise. This is available, and you know it. I told you, if you didn't know it before, no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, at any moment, you can return to the Lord. And here's the thing. You're going to choose a dumb storm more than likely after you decide to follow Jesus. You're going to look down at the waves, and you're going to start to sink at them, just when you were walking on water, just like Peter. We studied last week. And if your job at any point in time is to say, okay, I got it, I messed up, Jesus, come save me, that's where you come back to him. And you do what I told you. You repent. You're right. I was wrong. That was dumb. I'm sorry, I don't want to do that anymore. How do you want me to fix this? What do you want me to do? I'll do whatever you say. And you return back around and you start making the next decision to honor the Lord in the best way you can. It's always from this moment forward. And that doesn't mean that you won't have repercussions from your past, but the repercussions from your past become the opportunities for success in the Lord in the future. And how you handle it and how you react to it and who you trust in the middle of it will make the difference, all the difference, to people around you and to how you're viewed in the middle of that circumstance. Now, here's the thing, too. If you don't follow Jesus, and you just came today, I'm so glad you're here. I really am. I am. I don't want to tell you something hard, but I'm going to have to. All good things and stuff will make all things work for the good of those who love and serve the Lord. That's not for someone who does not follow Jesus. You really are working without a net. It's true. There's not some special dispensation for you where you're just kind of like, woo, it doesn't matter, it's going to work out. It may not. And if you don't follow Jesus, when you leave this earth, it's certainly not going to work out. You know, there is a place of eternal. This is a very short life here. It really is. Very short investment of following Christ and going against culture at many times to gain what reaches over past Orlando if we were in a timeline. I mean, I would even go past that, just like from here. You're doing a timeline that you can't see the end of. You gain this. And you're either going to do this, you're either going to start following Christ and see the benefits in the rest of this, wherever you are in the middle of it, and then from here on out, you're going to see the benefits of Christ, or you're going to not follow Christ, you're going to beat up, you may have some fun and some different stuff, but eventually you're going to get here, and then it's going to be nasty for the rest of the time. And nasty is a very nice word. You know, it's very, very it's mild compared to anything that is coming for you after you leave this life if you have not followed Christ. And I'll be honest, after following Jesus for the years that I followed him, and I've sat down and thought, you know, how would my life be different if I had not followed him here and there? And it's almost it's almost frustrating, not frustrating, I don't know what to call it. You know, I do have a confidence that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And I've just grown up with that. But I know there are some people out there that they don't grow up with that. They don't know if it's going to be all right. But that comes when you follow Jesus. When you realize the creator of the universe is now, I am following him, I'm working for that dude, and his company's never going under. My job will never go away. And my position will never. I won't need that. He won't need me anymore. Yes, he will. He will always need me. There is a point there where it's different. And for someone who has not followed Christ, I urge you, you need to make that decision in your life. You need to do it today. And what you do is you realize, we realize the truth that all of us knows. Everybody's screwed up somewhere. Everybody's made a bad decision. Everybody's chosen something. It doesn't have to be catastrophic. It can be anything. Because the 99.9999999% of the problem with sin is not what the result here on earth is. It's that you insulted the Creator who made you. That's the problem. Okay, that's what you go to hell for, right? You understand that, right? It's not because I killed somebody and that was really bad. No, it's because you chose to go against what God said. That's the real big problem. The other stuff is inconsequential compared to, that's how great God is and how important this is and how important your life is. That's the big issue. So it really doesn't matter how many times you do community service. It's not going to fix it. Only Jesus can fix that, and that's what you realize. Okay, right, you're right. Okay, I get it. I blew it. I am eternally screwed up, and that's okay because Jesus knew it. God knew it. Jesus died on a cross. He was perfect. He didn't do anything, any good or bad decision or neutral or just toothbrush or eat for breakfast. He didn't do anything that God would not have done in his place because he was God and man at the same time. And so realizing that, I admit who I am, and then I trust him with my life, and I say, I'm going to follow you with the rest of my life, and I'm going to put my foundation on you. And from that moment on, I am secure and unshakable in storms. Sometimes I don't know it. Sometimes I'm going to try to go back to my old nature, and I'm going to try to freak out, but I don't have to. I don't need to, because the promises that God said are true and stable for me. And that's where you begin to follow Christ. That's the moment. And you make a conscious decision for that. You don't just grandfather in that. You just like tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la along one day and then magically, look, I became a Christian somewhere. No, there was a point that you made a decision. That's what I'm going to do. If you have not made that decision and you don't know the time you did and you just think you tra-la-la into church one day and it worked out, it didn't. I'm sorry. I got to tell you, it's the truth. I wish it was different. I wish you could just ride by in a car and just like shoot people with a water gun and they're Christians. I mean, I wish you could do that, but I can't. You got to make a decision. I can't trick you into that. Nobody can. You make a decision in your heart that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, regardless of the circumstance. And that's what it is for you. And all of these promises that we've talked about, all of these things about being unshakable, all of these things in the middle of life storms, these are available for those who follow Christ. And it's not a magic incantation to start to follow him if you're not following him. It is where you make a decision in your heart and you tell the Lord that. Lord, I get it. I messed up. I need you. Let me follow you. And I give my life to you from here on out. And I'll tell people that. And I'll be that. You know, and that's what it is. From that moment on, you begin to follow Christ.
Thanks for being a part of Bay West today. Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. Please feel free to check us out at baywestchurch.org, or you can follow us on